Hi. I'm really sick. I apologize. If I'm getting my energy back up, I'm going to do it. So, that essay that Chad just read actually was in, a version of it was in Backpacker magazine online, and right?
Yes.
Yep. Which is great, so you can go read it there, and I'm really happy we got it placed there. It's really, really good. So, yeah. Hey Tim, how are you?
Doing well, Russ.
What are you?
What are you going to read, Russ?
Honestly, I want to call an audible and try something different.
Oh. All right.
No, but it's still a faithy one, I'm thinking.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Tell us what you're going to read.
Well, I want to read, because I realized that I've read, the one that I was going to read tonight, I've read every single one of these. And I like it, actually. It's one of my favorites in the book, but I think I need to, we promised new stuff, and that one is not new. So maybe, I was going to read the Iron Rod one. Do you remember that one? It's about Mormonism.
Do the same.
I was going to do that, and I didn't. A fisherman here said, "Tie the Mormon girl," which is a Utah pattern from the 20s, 30s, 40s. But it requires a teal feather with a single black dot on it. I didn't have time to scrape it together, but I was going to do it.
I could just read the one I've got too.
No, read.
Tie the same
Okay.
one. Tie the wet hack.
I'll tie a soft tack. So Russ is going to read this great story. It's my favorite. I don't know what it is. Actually, the one that he was going to read about the water witcher is among my favorites in the book. And that story was based on faith. But as this one appears to be, the fly that I'm going to tie is one of my personal favorites. This is a little larger than what I normally fish with. And I wanted to ask before, any fishermen or women out here? Anybody fish?
Cool.
Okay. So maybe you're familiar with the type of fly called a soft tackle. It's a wet fly. It's tied with, in this case, I'm using a chicken feather for one of my hens. But it's a soft feather that sinks. This particular one has peacock on. And a peacock soft tackle is one of my favorite flies to use when I don't know what else to put on. Like I said, on a smaller boat. And when you fish these flies, you're fishing them underwater, so you can't see the fly. And the only way you know you have a fish or any interest is you'll feel a tap on the line, because the line is taut, because you're casting it out and letting it swing down, and the fish will hit it and you'll feel that bump. And so you're fishing blind or fishing by faith. Another thing with the peacock curl, the iridescence of this peacock curl, which is actually the fibers from the tail of the peacock, you can see that iridescence. That, in many people's minds, and I think in the fish's eyes, has a special kind of magic that people will fish with because it's such a cool, natural material. So having faith in a material and having faith in a fly you can't see, I think dovetails excellently into this story that I don't even know what it's about.
Tim, this is on me. I'm sorry. I just was sitting there and I was like, I want to try something different.
I can BS my way through anything.
No, I know. That's why riding long distances with you in a car is very nice. So,
Okay. I guess that's a compliment.
Yeah, no, it is for sure. I just want to also say that, so Tim's talking about fishing wet hackle with what all of us wimps now use. We would use an indicator, but he's fishing without an indicator, which is just downright badass. I mean, that's really cool. He's
Indicator
humble,
is a fancy word for bobber.
Yeah. So, that's pretty amazing. So, can I ask you, Tim, how did the Chernobyl ant? Is it just that giant thing? Is that your connection to the last one?
Yeah, actually, and I heard Chad mention a foam body, something or other. So
Yeah.
I said,
that's perfect.
There's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, it wasn't too far off.
Yeah. Very good. Okay, so I am going to read this one. This one was out of all of the ones that I wrote in the book, this one was emotionally the hardest one to write, kind of by far. And I think it should be pretty evident why. I think it will make sense why. I'm happy with how it came out. It's weirdly, it's made going home really easy lately, because I basically am able to say all the things that I don't really dare say to my family in an essay, and they can like me or not like me, and I'm kind of done with it. I'm kind of free from it, which is really nice for me. And so it's a fairly well, you'll see, it's a fairly personal essay in a way, but it's all about faith, and I think it actually works pretty well with this. It doesn't have anything about water witching, which is a shame because all essays should, but I think it will work actually pretty
You'll
well.
have to buy the book if you want to read this.
Yeah.
Great story about water witching.
It's called The Iron Rod. Just one more thing. Like Chad and I are often in each other's essays, and so and that's a thing throughout the book. And so, so the Chad I'm referencing is that guy. So just so you know, okay. If they ask, just say you're here to cook dinner. We need people to cook dinner, and I'll even throw you a potato to pill. Chad said. Are they going to ask? No, probably not. Maybe. Chad paused longer than made me comfortable. No, they won't. Are we doing something bad, I asked. I don't think so. When Chad told me about the fishing at Cinnamon Creek Campground, it was always with a reverent and wistful tone. He told stories of big, eager browns, rainbows, and cutthroats that practically ran into your net. The land was owned by the Mormon Church and hardly ever got fished. Chad worked at the camp in the summer, which gave him a pass into the campground and earned him the privilege of fishing there. He helped pitch tents and cook food for dozens of young Mormon boys in training to go on missionary services all over the world. And if the big fish weren't enough, it was the only place for hundreds of miles where you could catch a kokanee salmon. I wanted in. I wanted in so bad that I knew I would lie for it. The lady at the gate asked who I was with. When I answered, I realized it wasn't a test. She just wanted to give me good directions. She was soft with age and quick to smile and laugh. She noticed the fishing gear in my back seat. You think you're going to get a chance to fish? She asked. They keep the leaders pretty busy. Oh, I hope so. Do you know any place that's good? Well, geez, she waved her hand towards the creek. Take your pick, they're everywhere. As I drove into the campground, I noticed the young men weren't wearing the grubby jeans and t-shirts I expected. Instead, they all wore white shirts and ties, and the campgrounds weren't weren't bushy with dirt trails. It was manicured green lawns and bark-covered walkways. I drove slowly so that I wouldn't kick up dust and soil their Sunday bests. Chad waved me over from the edge of the camp where he pulled on his waders. He watched me watch the kids. Oh hell, it's not that weird. We put in just above a footbridge. The creek was gin clear with rust-colored rocks of the size and shape of bowling balls. Willows and cottonwoods choked the banks. The bottoms wiggled with fish that were mostly concealed by the color of the rocks. A man in a vintage three-piece suit stood on the bridge. His wiry gray hair probably hadn't been combed since he got to camp a few days before. He watched us through aged yellow eyeglasses as we tied on our flies. Do you think you'll catch any? Chad shrugged. Probably. Well, I hope so. You're a little confident, he chuckled and winked at us. Nothing's guaranteed, boys. I could tell he didn't trust our rods. Most people don't believe in fly angling, including most fly anglers. We try to get past the thought that our skill is a rough-hewn mix of luck and charlatanism. But chief among the disbelievers is the casual spin angler. And I'd bet this guy was one of those. He'd probably fished 30 times in his life and maybe caught fish 10 of those times. The rods and gear look more complicated and less effective to the casual angler. Chad had a fish on before the guy crossed the bridge. I looked back at the man and tried to not look smug. I'm pretty sure it didn't work. Alongside the stream was a hard-packed dirt trail with a metal handrail. Brush had been cleared almost too aggressively from the trail. For some reason, the incongruity of a handrail next to this small trail out in the middle of nowhere didn't register with me. But as Chad and I stood in the stream lining up our next shot, another leader in a white shirt and tie came up the trail and explained that he would be leading a group of boys along the trail shortly. "I'd appreciate it if you could keep it down," he said. I nodded and pretended to know what he was talking about. Chad asked the leader if we should get out of the creek and go upstream so we wouldn't interfere. The leader insisted we'd be fine, but he asked us again to keep quiet. Minutes later, a line of blindfold teens in white shirts arrived, stumbling along the path and holding onto the handrail. They weren't talking or laughing. If anything, they looked scared. They bit their lips and held tight to the rod. I looked at Chad for an explanation, and he just shrugged. As per our orders, we couldn't do much than that. The groping teens were recreating a scene from the Book of Mormon. In it, the ancient prophet Lehi sees the tree of life in a vision. The tree produces a delicious heavenly fruit, which represents salvation. But for Lehi and his family to reach it, they must pass through a thick mist. To get through the mist into the tree, God provided an iron rod, like a handrail. In Mormonism, holding on to the rod symbolizes staying true to the Word of God. Also in the vision, a river runs parallel to the path, and on the other side, a large building looms with people laughing and pointing at those holding the rod. Only the unfaithful let go of the rod and tried to ford the river to be with the people in the building, but they drowned. We both got into fish at the same time. They stumbled over each other to take the fly, taking it as soon as it alighted on the water. It was the kind of fishing that one wants to scream about, but we stayed dumb. We attempted to pull in fish after fish silently so as to not disturb the blindfolded teens tripping and grasping the rail just feet away. All we could do was look at each other and smile, our eyebrows buried in the shade of our baseball caps. The effect of this activity on the kids, I imagine, was pretty powerful. They hear water flowing near them, but they can't see it. The only thing keeping their feet dry is the rod. Chad and I completed the metaphor, playing the role of the unfaithful who veered from the path and taunted as the righteous pressed on. The leaders should have told us not to be quiet, but instead to succumb to our natural inclinations, which was to laugh at the teens and holler when we pulled in trout. We were mostly quiet, but I suspect they heard fish flapping in nets in our whispered conversation. The truth is, I am the one who veered, in the church camp metaphor and in life. I lied to be calf deep in that perfect stream, and less abstractly, I left the Mormon church in my 20s. If anything, it should have been in that stream to warn the teens it was me. I dipped into the water gradually. It started when I was a teenager in an all-night conversations about religion with my best friend. He would later become a vocal atheist and a critic of the Mormon church. But when he left the church, I stayed. I still loved it. It's the faith that inspired my ancestors to leave comfortable lives in Europe and walk across a continent. Yes, including Nebraska. That's why it took me until my mid-20s to stop going to church, long after I'd stopped believing. Entering grad school seemed like the right time to exit my faith. That's when and where I met my wife, too. After we married, we lived in a defunct Mormon church in rural Idaho. The incongruity of non-believers living in a house of God was not lost on us. It felt wrong cleaning up my dog's shit from the perfect wood floors in the apartment. Our landlord gave us keys to the chapel to store our bicycles, and we found half a dozen disused toilets next to the pews. Dead mice were scattered on the floor like toys in a nursery. My wife, who was also raised in the Mormon church, felt some fidelity to the faith that I had lost, so we made a pact. Every Sunday we would go either to church or to the mountains. I deferred to her because if it were up to me, it would always be the mountains. Starched button-down shirts have always fit my body strangely. She usually picked mountains, but we kept the same mantra, church or mountains, for a couple of years. Eventually the mantra mutated to mountains or movies, and that's where it stayed. I've always hated the expression lost my faith, like it was a set of keys or an old book. I know exactly where my faith is, and I could go and find it at any time. It's in that chapel that I avoid on Sundays and with my parents and sisters. The truth is, I'm more comfortable with those in the water, any water, than those sitting in the pews. Despite my mom's fears, there may still be hope for me. There's a slight problem with the mixed metaphor in the primary text of the iron rod allegory. The water in the vision both drowns those who veer, but it is also seen as the fountain of living water, which waters are a representation of the love of God. I like that the river is murky, that it's both good and bad. But even if the water was gin clear bad, given the option of going to church and staying dry or wading into a river that one day will probably kill me, I'd walk towards the river every time. After Moses parted the waters and killed thousands of Egyptians, he didn't have a temple to commune with God. So he hiked up a mountain and watched God's finger write the 10 Commandments on stone. I could lie and say that I'm in the mountains hiking the streams to find God and the faith I misplaced, but I'm not. Most of my spirituality evaporated out of me. But if God were to talk to me, it wouldn't be in a church because I wouldn't be there. It would be on a remote mountain creek miles from the nearest chapel. When the boys finally got out of earshot, Chad and I talked about the fishing, but nothing much more needed to be said. It felt downright holy, and it had little to do with proximity to the path, the rod, or the camp. We fished higher and the stream got smaller, but never too small to hold fish. Chad asked me if I had ever been to a camp like this when I was growing up, and I said, me? No. That night I didn't stay to peel potatoes. I snuck off the mountain with a sore back and a phone filled with photographs of trout. But Chad stayed. I could hear the dad jokes he told to the teens and could taste the Dutch oven stew he made, perhaps too heavy with garlic. He found a way to be both in the river and near the path, but the next morning after breakfast, before everyone broke camp, I imagine Chad put together his rod and slipped deep into that creek.